Hi, friends. Welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. Today, we're going to talk about all of the books I bought, and the money I spent in 2022. So, should be interesting. I value transparency, and also for those of you who've been around a while, might know I did a video discussing how much I had spent about halfway through 2022, and I wanted to do an updated look at the end of the year to see, did I improve? What were my overall sort of stats on what I spent and how many books I was buying, and let's talk a little bit about it and what my goals are for the coming year now that we are in a new year. So, hello, welcome. Hi, Maya. Hi, Cool Gamer. Hope you all are doing well. And hopefully, this is interesting. I have slides because, of course, I do. Um, so, here we go. What I spent, plus some statistics about the books that I bought as well, and books that I generally acquired. I will say this is not just about what I bought, but I'm also just generally going to be talking about books that came into my collection in some way um, during the course of the years. That includes things from publishers and whatnot. So you'll get kind of an overview. Hi, Kirsten. All right, so first up, here's an overview. First, we need to talk about how many books did I read in 2022. The total number of books that I read in the year was 395, which I think is an important thing to talk about when we look at how many books are coming into my collection, because this might seem excessive for people who aren't moving this many books along already. So I just kind of want to preface with that. I am a higher than usual volume reader. In 2022, I got 323 new physical books. This is not all books that I purchased. A lot of them aren't. We're going to talk more specifics, but a total of 323 new physical books came into my collection. This is a mix of finished books and advanced reader copies. I didn't separate those out for the purposes of this video, so it's kind of like an overall number. And of the 323 that came in, I read 61% of them, which honestly is pretty good. 197 of those books have been read, so there's, less than 40% that are new books continuing on to my TBR for 2023. Audiobooks, I ended up with 158 new audiobooks. This is all purchases, and 96 of them I read, which is also about 61%. So the rest are continuing to be on my TBR for the coming year. And I didn't buy a lot of new ebooks. This isn't surprising. I don't read a lot of ebooks, to be honest. It is my least favorite way to read, and the majority of my e-reading is NetGalley but I did buy or acquire 21 new ebooks in the year. I read 13 of them, which is about 62%, leaving a few new ones on my remaining TBR for the coming year. So this is kind of an overview of what happened. Now let's look at some physical book data. I started collecting data on my physically acquired books at the very beginning of the year, so I have a little bit more information on them than I do my audiobooks and my ebooks. That should be corrected moving forward. So when you get this video at the end of 2023, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more because I'm aggregating it all in one spreadsheet, whereas for 2022, it's in two separate spreadsheets collecting different bits of data. So I have more information to give you on my physical books. So we're going to talk a little bit about the makeup of my physical books, which is the majority of them anyway. So I think this is kind of interesting. All right, first up, let's look at the location I acquired them. As you can see, a lot of the books that came in were not books that I actually purchased. All in all, about 40% of the books that came in were either sent to me from the publisher, a PR company, or an author. So as a reminder, we had 323 new books come in the year, and about 40% of those were not books that I purchased myself physically. Here are some of the other places I got them from. Amazon was 16%, Barnes& Noble was about 9%, indie bookstores were about 17%, so about the same as Amazon, which is actually pretty good. I feel like that's kind of bumped up, but this kind of gives you an idea of like where are the physical books that were coming in the year coming from, and yeah, a lot of them. This is a good question. Am I tracking books I have from pre 2022 in my physical TBR? No, I do not have. For the purposes of this video, I don't have that information. On Goodreads, I do have a TBR shelf, and that includes all unread books in my physical TBR. So when you hear me talking about the Read What You Own challenge or like my goals and trying to read down my physical TBR, that is everything, not just what came in 2022. That's existing TBR as well. All right. This is taking a look at genre for all the physical books. So this is a combination of books I purchased and books that were sent to me from the publisher or the author or a PR company. And, maybe unsurprisingly, a big chunk of it is fantasy. Fantasy is my most read genre, and about 39% of the books that came into my collection in 2022 were fantasy. Sci-fi is the second biggest number at like 14%. And then we have kind of a mix of other things. I don't know that there's any big surprises here. And then if we look at the books that I purchased for myself, this is the genres. So this is removing all of the books that were sent to me unsolicited or solicited. This is just books I actually purchased, and even more of it is fantasy. So 40% of the books that I purchased for myself in 2022 were fantasy books. Horror and sci-fi are up there too, 14.7% sci-fi, almost 9% horror. And then romance is pretty good. This splits it out into contemporary, speculative, and historical. Doesn't look like I bought a lot of historical romance. It was probably less than 1%. So all in all, we're looking at what, around 17, 18% romance that I purchased for the year for myself, which I think is interesting. Also, hello to the new people popping in. I see y'all. Next, let's look at age categories. Again, this is all physical books that came in 2022, both purchases and books that came from outside. And 78% were for an adult audience. Again, like I think a lot of this is mirroring my reading tastes, which I guess is good that we're seeing similarities between the characteristics of the books coming into my collection and characteristics of the kinds of books I'm actually reading, which I think bodes well for the books still to be read actually getting read. About 17% of my total books that came in were YA, and then a little bit of middle grade. If we look at just the books that I purchased for myself, similarly, 78% is adult, 18% is YA, 4% is middle grade. I would not include children's books that I purchased on here just because if I bought them, I bought them for my kids and I don't count those towards my personal books um, bought on my spreadsheets. But if a kid's book is sent to me for review from the publisher, it would pop up on in the other list. All right. Okay, so we all know my goal every month is to read about 50% by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, and about 25% or more from openly queer authors. So, is that reflected in the books that are coming into my collection? And the answer is yes, it is pretty well. So, if we look at all the physical books that came into my collection, books I purchased, books I didn't purchase, 41%, about 41% of them were by openly queer authors, which is great. So, yeah, a lot of books by queer authors are coming in. And if we look at the books that I purchased, a little bit less, but 37% of the books that I purchased for myself are by openly queer authors. So, the books that I'm buying, the books that I'm being sent are definitely mirroring the demographics of the books what I want to be reading. In terms of author race and ethnicity, this also holds true pretty well. This is looking at all physical books that came in, books I purchased and otherwise. And I'm going to look over here for a second because I did the math on this earlier. Where is it? Okay. So for all books it looks like 44.8% were by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, 55% white. So again, we're not quite at that 50% mark, but we're pretty close, which is good. And then if I look just at the books I purchased for myself, we're doing even better. Clearly the books that I'm going out and buying, I do make it a point of trying to, in my purchasing habits, support marginalized authors, and so this kind of bears out in the data in terms of my purchased books. 53.3% of them were by Black, Indigenous, and person of color authors, which I am happy about. That, like, of the money I am spending, a significant portion of it is going to actually support marginalized authors, which is what I want. So I'm happy to see that that's what's happening. All right. Okay, so let's look at spending overview. How much did I actually spend? And then we'll look at the monthly breakdown. So on physical books in the entire year, I spent $1,896.30. We're going to talk a little bit on a separate slide about the averages, average spent per book. But audiobooks, I spent $912.32. I am a heavy audiobook listener, so I don't think it's super surprising that that is a big part of my budget. The average that I spent per audiobook was $5.77. So I'm pretty good at getting a deal for sure. Ebooks, I spent $23.38. Like I said, I'm not a big ebook reader, so this wasn't much. My average spent on ebooks was $1.11. And then from January to July, I had Kindle Unlimited, which I figured out was definitely not worth it for me because I'm not a big Kindle reader and I was spending 10 bucks a month on it and I wasn't really using it. So January to July was a total of $69.93 on Kindle Unlimited, but then I canceled that subscription and I think that was a good choice. So at this point, if I really want an ebook, I just buy it and it's cheaper than what I was spending for Kindle Unlimited because I just don't read very many of them. So my total spent for the year across all formats was $2,833.59 for an average of $236.13 per month, which considering that this is what I do full time, isn't terrible. I do want to see those numbers go down. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in my goals section. But this isn't terrible, to be honest. And I did think it was interesting when I did my video halfway through the year, how many people were surprised I didn't spend more money on books. So yeah, these are the numbers of what I'm actually spending. And I am trying to spend less this year, but I it's okay. So, it's always scary to see numbers and all in one place. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, there can be a little sticker shock if you're not prepared for it. I think I had more of that when I did this video back in July, but I kinda knew a little bit more what to expect here, and I'm like, "Okay, you know, like, just under $3,000 for the year." We'll talk about this in goals, but it's, considering it's the first year I was actually tracking this, it's okay. All right. Um, let's look a little bit more specifically at the physical books. The least that I paid for a book, other than free, because some of them were free, but the least I paid for a book was 90 cents. I think I probably had like store credit to pay for some of it. And the most I paid was $60, which was a special edition. So, you know, um, the average cost per book, if we look at all the physical books that came in, including books that I didn't actually buy, is $5.97. But if we take the average just based on the physical books that I actually purchased myself, that number is $11.28, which still, you know, like, not bad. I feel like I'm even though I have some higher end ones where I'm supporting Kickstarters or getting special editions for books I really love occasionally, in general, I try to get discounts on books that I'm buying when I'm able to. It would be fun to see how much you got back in credit by selling books to secondhand stores. Yeah, I that would be interesting to look at. I definitely had a decent amount of credit. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I would say I probably had like between two and $300 of store credit that I used to buy books in the year. Probably something like that. It might be a little less than that, but probably at least 200, something like that. Yeah, it's not too bad. Average for books purchased is pretty low. Yes. Yeah. As I said, I do try really hard to get discounts on books when possible. If I know I want to pre-order something, I'll try to do it when like Barnes& and Noble is having a sale and it's 25% off or something like that, or get used books in good condition. I should have looked at that actually. I didn't look at how many books I got used, but that would be interesting as well. All right, now let's look by month. As a reminder, I last looked at this in July, probably because I spent a lot in July and I was like, I need to get this under control. So here is the amounts that I spent. I think it's worth noting that I had a couple of big outliers. May was a big outlier because it was my birthday month and I had some money. Maybe I shouldn't have counted it this way, but I had a relative send me like $100 that I used to buy books. So like 100 of that 354 in May was like birthday money, not actually my money. And then in oh gosh, I think I don't remember why July was so high. One of these months, one of these higher months, I supported a Kickstarter that was like $100 for books that will come in later on. So, like, there are points at which it's a little bit higher. My lowest purchase month of the year was June at like $112.18. And this is purchases across physical audio and ebook for the month. So, however much I spent. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to look at the variation, even though the average is, 260 some dollars a month, we definitely get variation across different parts of the year. Kara says I would consider birthday money to be gifted, so I feel like it shouldn't count towards your book spending, even though you chose what to spend it on. I mean, that's fair. I don't think it would be unreasonable to say I spent more like $250 in May, but at least and maybe for this year I'll do that and consider it gifted, but for last year I didn't do that. Target is doing a buy one get one half off. You chose not to resist. That's fair. I did pre-order a few books in the Barnes and Noble pre-order sale recently, so you know. All right. So, what are some of my goals based on all of this moving forward? One is that I'm participating, and some of you might have seen this in Read What You Own. I'm not doing it as stringently as, as Shay and Izzy are doing. They're the ones who started it, but I am doing it and I'm trying to actively reduce my various TBRs because it is higher than what I would like it to be. I don't have a problem having a relatively large physical TBR just because I do read so much. But even with that, I want it to be a little bit lower. If you want to know specific numbers, I know I talked about this in my book haul video because I'm kind of doing book hauls between now and midway through the year as also update videos on how Read What You Own is going for me. So, how many books came in, how many books did I get off my TBR, which I think is kind of interesting. But currently, my physical owned TBR is like 474 books, which is a little more than I would prefer. I would like it to be more like 350 or so. I'm okay with having, like, about a year's supply of books for what I would read, but yeah, so I am working on that. I would like to average closer to $160 a month. Not a problem that I might have variations over the year, but ideally, I'm trying to kind of keep my book spending to more like 2000 across the year. We'll see if that's possible and reduce it a little bit from last year. And how is it going so far? It's going okay. Well, okay. So I want to say it's going well. However, there was like a special edition of one of my all-time favorite books that was very expensive that I pre-ordered, and so because of that, my January spending is really high. But because of that, but if I eliminate that, like one special edition book, in January I spent like $96 across all formats, which I think is pretty reasonable, and I've been doing a decent job of reducing things. So yeah, these are kind of my goals. I want to continue to target my purchases so that I am primarily uh, financially supporting marginalized authors because that's something that I value and I want to keep doing that. Oh no, Sword of Kaigen. I did pre-order that, but I'm not counting that. I probably should actually because I think I counted that for February? How did I do that? That's a good question. Sword of Kaigen does have a special edition. No, but it was the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I have said for years that if they ever came out with a special edition of the 5th season, I would be on top of it, and so I, you know, winced at the sticker price and went ahead and did it, but I don't know if I can justify doing the entire series because of how much they're charging, but I at least got the 1st book. Yeah, where did I put Sword of Kaigen? That's actually a no, you know what? I'm putting the Sword of Kaigen one in my March spending because that's when it's supposed to release. But yes, I did also get that one. That one was like more reasonable, like $60. Sure. I don't know if I want to tell you how much the 5th season one was because it was a lot. If you really wanna know. It was also in the UK, and so it was even more because of the conversion rate. So with shipping, which was, like, a lot, like, I think, like, $50 of it was just shipping, but it was, like, $315. Oh my god, it was so much. But, I am excited to have a special edition of my favorite book. So, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna do the rest of the series probably because it's seems very excessive. But I did pre-order that, and in return, am trying to significantly limit how much I'm spending on other books and focus on reading what I own. So most of the books that I am purchasing right now are, at least physically, um, are books that I need for specific projects and some pre-orders. I do have a few pre-orders. Priscilla, I keep hoping Folio will eventually release a set of the Broken Earth trilogy. I mean, that would be very exciting, and it would be another very, very expensive purchase. You thought Kaigen was bad. Yeah, listen, I mean, they are gonna be beautiful. It's a small press in the UK. You should look at but the one I got is the cheapest one. Like, the most expensive one is, like, I wanna say it's, like, around $1,500 or something. It is wild. Maybe it was even more than that. So, if you are a collector, like, there are very, very fancy editions of books you can get. So, yeah. And I guess that's worth saying too, is, like, I am a book collector to a certain extent as well as a reader, but I only collect, like, select books that are favorites. So, yeah, I know. It's a lot. Oh my gosh. So, there you go. That is what I spent. I'd be scared to touch a book that costs that much. Yeah. Wear like gloves like or something when you do it. But yeah, that's what I spent on books and kind of where that spending went um in 2022. Hopefully this was interesting and we will revisit this at the end of 2023 and see how I did with my goals. Like, can I spend even less than I've been spending and focus for this year on really reading down my already owned TBR? Um, yeah, hopefully that was interesting. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to chat for a few minutes before I hop off since we're only at like 24 minutes. But yeah, I'm going to need to be revived. Yeah, I know it's a lot. I don't know who has that kind of book money, but I will say, you know what? If you have the money to buy a like, you know, one or $2,000 edition of your favorite book, there are worse things you could spend it on. There are people who spend that on a pair of shoes, and at least the book has higher resale value. I don't know. I don't have that kind of money, but like some people do. See, yes, I was getting a bargain. Exactly. Yeah. That shipping was a lot though. Like the shipping was like 50 bucks or something of it. But I assume the shipping is going to be like making sure it's in perfect condition when it arrives. So it's probably worth paying for. And I think the guy who does it is doing it all himself. So stay tuned. I'll show you when it eventually arrives. I spent a month of rent on books last year. Yeah. Uh, yep. I didn't because I live in New York City, but I came close. Uh, the local libraries here are great. Um, they're really good. And I know things have changed a little bit with the pandemic, but especially audiobooks. Um, the audiobooks are available and those are really good. And there are physical books. I haven't used that as much since COVID, but yeah, like it's a really good library system here for sure. And I do use that. I guess that's another thing I didn't specifically look at is some of my audiobooks I do get from the library. And so I've seen people do videos of like how much did I save on books by using the library, which I think is a really cool, interesting thing to do because yeah, I mean, like these numbers would be even higher if it wasn't for the New York Public Libraries. So on a book buying ban last year, and it was tough, but libraries became your BFF. Yeah, I love that. That's yeah, I think, like, because this is what I do, I probably like, I'm not trying to just say I can't buy anything at all, but I am working on limiting it. Priscilla, I got back into reading during the pandemic and went a little wild, making up for years of no book shopping, but I decided this year it's time to slow down and read through what I've amassed. Love it. I love that. Thinking about the saving aspect or getting an arc of a book I would have bought. Yes, that is actually huge, and I think that you can see the numbers here a little bit because arcs or even finished copies, there are definitely books that are sent to me, especially by Tor. Tor is very good to me, and so every year they send me a decent number of finished copies of books, and often those are books that I would have gone out and bought myself if they weren't sending them for to me. So I am definitely saving money that way, and I think you can see that in the disparity between, like, my average price per book, um, if you include all of the ARCs and books that were sent to me from publishers, the fact that it's so low. I mean, granted, not all of those are things I would have bought myself, but there's a solid number. I love this, tracking how much you save this year by using the library. I think that's a really cool project to do. I think that would be really interesting. So yeah. I know it can be painful to track all of this and put it down on paper and look at it, but I think it can be really useful. And I also think it's worth noting, right, that like as much as some of these numbers can seem high, especially if this is like a big part of your life or whatever, like I just think about how much some people who are, spend on like makeup and clothing and stuff, and at least books like are like, I can turn around and go and get store credit for ones that I'm finished with and don't want to keep in my on my shelves, which I think is good. Are most of the books I buy new releases? That is a great question. You know what, it would be interesting to look at the publication date of the books that I buy. I did not do that this year. Maybe I should add that for this year. I'm early enough in the year I could. Let me just kind of like take a peek. I think it's a mix. Like my gut instinct would be it's a combination. I buy some backlist stuff. I buy some yeah, I mean it's really a mix. Like probably more front list new releases than older things, but sometimes I'll get an arc of a book, and if I love it a lot, I might buy a finished copy. Um, I also buy classics, or I've been slowly stocking up on Octavia Butler books because I eventually want to own everything that she's written. So it's a mix. It depends. So much data that I could be tracking. Y'all are making me want to add to my already hefty spreadsheet. I love a spreadsheet. I think you get a lot of interesting data from it. All right, so I think I'm going to end it there. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. And hopefully, this was interesting, and we'll see how I do for the rest of the year. Yeah, have a great week, and I will see you again soon.